I'm not sure if you can feel the awkwardness, but I definitely can. As soon as I glanced at this elevation, I knew that we had a lot of work to do, and the developer felt the same way, which is why they wanted me to review it. First, looking at the elevations, but also taking a second look at the plans. Because in my experience, when something's up design-wise with the elevations, and in this case, it definitely is, there are a lot of design rules being crossed with this elevation. There's usually some things with the floor plan that could also be worked out. So today we're going to be reviewing this home design, breaking down exactly what's making it awkward, and also talking about the small changes that could be made to make it a much more cohesive design. My name is Rafi, and I love sharing everything that I know when it comes to home design so that we can make good design more attainable to everyone, and honestly create more homes that we actually enjoy living in. The home design we're going to be reviewing is new construction. That means nothing that I'm about to show you has been built yet, which also means we can make whatever changes we need as long as it sticks within the parameters of this long, narrow lot. The developer gave me 2 points to touch on, or 2 main things to look at, and that would be taking the front elevation and giving it a more timeless traditional feel, because right now it's definitely in the transitional, or what I would call lack of a style, and we need to either push it in a modern direction or a more traditional direction, and they're wanting a bit more traditional. The other point they made was just reviewing the floor plans and seeing how they might be optimized a little bit more. They felt pretty good where the floor plans were at right now, but also felt like a second eye could do a lot of good for them. Before we jump into the floor plans, I like to start with the elevation first, or what I would call the massing of the home, to see if some of those adjustments would make the home look a lot better and give it a lot more curb appeal, and then we'll carry those changes through to the floor plan. The first thing I notice when I look at the front elevation of this home is the double gable. And we're gonna talk all about proportions, because on a home that is as narrow as this one, you should not be having a double gable. The only time that this works is when you have a lot of width to work with, so that the center proportion that does not have a gable has more mass than the actual side proportions do. That is the only way that this double gable type of design looks good. Whenever you're working on an elevation design, which I would advise you start massing this out in the beginning before you start working on the floor plans, you want to think about your proportions with a primary mass and then a secondary mass. The primary mass needs to be a lot larger than the secondary, and there are actually strict proportions that you can follow if you want to. They're classical ones, they're natural ones, all different types, but if you follow these proportions, you will have a home that just feels a lot better. Now, if we wanted to go the classical route, you could do a proportion that's 1 to 1.6, or you could just stick to 2/3 or 4/5. But as long as you follow this rule of hierarchy where you have a large main mass and then secondary masses, I promise you, your designs are going to look so much better and feel so much better. For this particular elevation, if I were to strip away all the windows and just look at the masses, that would be the 2 gables on either end and the centerpiece. It looks like the gables on either end are just squishing in that centerpiece. And that's exactly why it doesn't feel good. And this is the exact reason that this home elevation feels awkward, because those 2 sides are just squishing in that center. And especially on a narrow lot like this, we want to make the home feel more grounded. We don't want to make it feel even taller and more narrow and honestly more chopped up. The good thing is it's a super easy fix, and we just do that through simplifying, which honestly is another secret to great design. Simplify things, refine things. We're gonna do that by stripping back those 2 gables that honestly should have never been there and creating one simple roof that goes all the way across. Now, the fun part is we have 2 options to work with. We could either create a second floor porch and give it that very southern, classical, kind of urban, or I would say old suburban, which now is urban. They're in urban centers of suburban cities, but that type of row house feel. Or we could do probably what the developer wants and not have the added cost of that second floor porch, especially since it's not the primary bedroom, it's like a secondary bedroom, and just do a shed roof off the front. Now, you might think by us making this elevation more simple, we're taking away it feeling special or, however you feel. But in actuality, it is giving the design hierarchy, which is visually going to make it a lot more interesting and a lot more impressive. And also, hierarchy is one of the oldest tricks in the visual art book. You want to give all of your designs hierarchy no matter what visual art you're in, whether that's architecture or sculpture or whatever it might be, because that's what creates interest for the design. So what is hierarchy? It is when you take different elements of different scales and arrange them so that they have importance and your eye can work its way around a design or work its way around a design like this. But it's not having competing elements of the same scale, which also ties into the whole proportions thing that I was just talking about. You want one large thing, a secondary thing, or maybe two secondary things that are split up, and then a third thing that's much smaller, and you want to work your way down in scale. That way your eye has things to move around. You don't want a bunch of big things or a bunch of medium-sized things. That's honestly one of the worst things you can do when you're designing an exterior. And if you haven't noticed, that's what McMansion design, or honestly, just bad design, does on a regular basis. They have a lot of things that are the same scale, that same like middle-sized scale, scattered everywhere. And that's why the elevations look so complex and honestly kind of tacky in comparison to just a streamlined, beautiful, clean design. Another super common mistake I see whenever I'm looking at elevations is repeating the exact same design element in different use cases throughout the elevation. In this case, it would be repeating the windows of 3 4 times. They have the exact same thing 4 times, but they're all different spaces. We want to treat them different. I'm all for symmetry, but there's way too much glass and they're repeating this same type of pattern everywhere, and that's giving the home a very chaotic look. On top of that, whenever you have too much glazing, which by glazing I just mean glass from windows or doors, it also does not look good. So a number that I like to stick to is under 30%, 20 to 25% of glass on a front elevation, and that's for a more traditional design. So you always want to stick to that 20 to 25%, definitely under 30%. As soon as you start to get over that, you need to get away from the traditional, the classical, all of that, and don't even mention transitional, it's not a style. Go to modern. If you want a lot of glazing, you need to skip over to modern, because when you have too much glazing and you're trying to do a traditional design, it just looks bad. I don't even have a better word for it. It's just not good. I actually had to run the calculations for this front elevation, and it had over 50% of glass, which is another big reason why it just doesn't look that great. So what we need to do is scale back all of that glass, which will honestly cut back costs a bit, save the developer money, and make the home look a lot better. The other good thing about switching to 2 windows on this side is it's leaving some space for a column, so we can really frame out that front porch. All right, we have to talk about this front door. One of my biggest pet peeves is a pivot door on a traditional home. First of all, they are so expensive. There is no reason to use them unless it is for this very particular case. And that's when a wall is pivoting open. That's when you should use a pivot door, is when the actual plane of the wall opens up. It is such a beautiful moment, and honestly the only moment that I would ever use a pivot door or encourage a client to pay for a pivot door. So with all of that being said, we are removing the pivot door and doing a much more traditional front door for this house. We've cleaned up most of the front elevation and fixed the roof line and honestly simplified a lot of things, maybe to the point that they could actually put the money into that second floor porch if they wanted to. But now we need to talk about the materials. The developer mentioned that they wanted to use brick as one of the materials as an accent because they didn't want to put too much money into the exterior materials. And they mentioned they would just put it on one wall. Let me tell you, one of my biggest pet peeves ever is when you do not apply facade materials in volumes. So what do I mean? I know Every single one of you has driven by or run by or walked by a home that had a material on one side of a wall, but not on the other. So face on the front, when I'm looking at a drawing, it looks fine. But as soon as I see that house in real life and I'm looking at it from a corner, you immediately know that it's cheap. There is no question about it. You look at it and you're like, this is a cheap home. But why? And that's because they're treating the material like a wallpaper. You never want to do that. I realize that most of our cladding materials today are not full thickness brick. They are a very thin veneer. And that's totally fine, but you should still apply them in volumes. So if you or your client doesn't want to spend all of that money, what I want you to do is think about where you can accent with that material, so brick or stone, in a way that fulfills that entire design. So in this case, it might just be doing a brick porch. Or another option, if you wanted to spend just a little bit more, would be maybe cladding the piers in brick, which is also another great look, and it makes the home feel very grounded and honestly just a bit nicer versus having like a concrete exposed foundation or skirting it off in wood. Those are two ways that you can use a masonry material in a way that's not using a ton of material, because you're not cladding all of the walls. You're just using it in a specific place, but it looks good because it is that complete design. That entire element is that one material. Now, let's say that you have a little bit more money to spend and using the material a little bit more, but not to the degree that the entire house is going to be that material. Here's what I want you to do. When you're designing, you have to think about it in volumes. So you want that material to be able to go around 3 walls or maybe 2 walls, but it has to die into other walls where that material can stop. And it makes it look like that one element is completely masonry, and it gives it a great look. But the one thing is, if you are doing this, you have to also think through all of your trim, all of your casing, because whatever you're doing for that masonry volume is going to be different than the rest of the house. So it does bring in a little bit more design thinking that has to be done. If there's anything that I can run home about this, is always design in volumes. Always give those materials ending points. And it's not just for masonry, it's also if you're transitioning to, let's say you're using hardy board and you want to transition from a board and batten to a lap siding. You still have to think about this in volumes. Do not bring that lap siding to one corner and your board and batten to another corner and make that transition. If you do have a case like that, then the entire house needs to be in the same material, because no matter what we're doing, we're designing in volumes. For this particular design, since this is a spec build, the developer is very budget conscious. We are only doing the porch and the steps in brick, which is going to keep it simple, but it's going to give that very Southern classical look. And then we'll have a little bit more fun with the siding. Since we are leaning into that very Southern classical feel, whenever you're doing a classical design, you want to make that base really heavy and really grounded. And a great way to do that is with a larger scale siding. One that I really like is an oversized 8 to 10 inch V-groove that will run horizontal and really create a base, and then you can cap it at the top. And that base is not going to stop at the base of the second floor. No, it's going to extend a little bit further up so that we're not splitting the house in half, because you want the base to be taller than the second floor to really ground the structure down. And that goes back to our rules of proportions. We don't want things to be equal. We don't want to split the house in half equally. So the ground floor is going to seem taller than the second floor, even if it's not. Then on the second floor, we're going to run with a tight board and batten. I really love this for a more classical look because it takes it away from that farmhouse look and it gives it a much more tailored look, but not at a huge cost. The front elevation is dialed in, so let's look at all of these other elevations. The biggest thing that I can recommend for all of these other elevations is to just simplify. You don't need random gables anywhere. And as a rule, when it comes to creating these gables, random gables, you have to have an appendage to break the roof line. Let me say that again. You have to have an appendage to break the roof line. You should never have just a random gable sticking out. It has to be a volume coming out for you to break that main roof line. So this gable on the side, it needs to go. There's absolutely no reason why it needs to be here. Honestly, it makes the structure more complicated, it makes the likelihood of leaks more complicated, and it also cheapens the design. But where we do have an appendage is off the back. This entire volume does extend further than the main volume, so it makes perfect sense to make it a gable. It doesn't have to be a gable, it could just be an extension of the hip roof, but I do think bringing in that gable element would be really nice for this more classical design. So we're going to do that and then center up the windows in the center, and you'll see it on the floor plan. We can rotate that bed, no issue at all. It's going to make the back look so much better, which I've been spilling a lot of rules, but that's another one. You have to consider all of your elevations. I do understand when you're working on tight lots, you don't have to pay attention to the side elevations as much. It's more so that they just need to work, but you do need to pay attention to the rear elevation because whoever is hanging out in that backyard, when they look up, you want it to look pretty. You don't want it to look like this afterthought that clearly someone was thinking about the floor plan and not considering the elevation at all. And that's a pretty common mistake across a lot of home designs that I see, especially like the builder's grade track home ones. They never think about the back elevation, and it's such a missed opportunity because whenever you're hosting and people are hanging out in that space, you want it to feel just as good as the front. It's finally time to jump into this floor plan. We've been talking a lot about the elevations, but we do need to address the floor plan. And I always like to review floor plans piece by piece, unless I think that it is a floor plan that's worth just completely scratching and starting from scratch, because honestly, I've seen this, but this one, it just needs a few tweaks. It doesn't need a ton of reworking. We don't need to flip the kitchen to the front or move, big space movements, just some small tweaks to really optimize it. One of my favorite things to do is a walkthrough test. No, I cannot actually walk through this house because it's not built. But using my imagination, I can walk through every single space of this house and see what's working and see what's not working. Things I like to look out for are everything from big things like flow, furniture movement, furniture placement, how I'm going to walk and drop off things like the real functionality side of it, down to the nitpicky, can door trim actually fit around this door? Because believe it or not, that's one of the most common issues I see on site is the fact that no one thought about door trim needing to fit all the way around the door. So the door is either too close to another wall or another door or something like that. And all of this can be visualized through this walkthrough test, where basically you start from one part of the house, wherever you would enter. I usually like to do it starting with the front door, but you could also do it starting from a mudroom or a garage, like where the owner would enter. And then we are going to walk through this entire thing, experience it in our mind, look for the issues. And the moment I walk in this front door, I already see an issue. And that is a foyer that has no drop zone, which is essential. You need a place, if you have the size house for it, which this house is plenty big enough to have it, you need a place for people to drop keys, drop shoes, drop bags, all of that good stuff. All homes need this if they're of that size, and this home doesn't have it. The other issue I see is it has too many doors. I do not want to walk into a foyer and have all of these different doors creating chaos in my mind. I want to simplify it. And the good thing is there is a super simple way to simplify this and reduce the amount of doors, and that's creating an alcove. It's my secret little trick that's not really a secret because I rant about it all the time, but we are going to remove this closet here and create a little alcove, which is basically just a hallway. So cased opening from the foyer going into this hallway, and then you could either go into the bedroom or go into the bathroom. If you wanted it to be even more private, you could add a pocket door. So if you have guests, you could close it, a guest staying in that room, or let's say it's an actual bedroom for the kid of the house or mother-in-law or something like that, they could close off that pocket door to have the privacy to go to the bathroom. The other great thing about this is the bathroom went from being a pretty, I wouldn't say awkward layout, but just a lot going on in a very small shower. But by reducing one of those doors, we're getting a bigger closet, a bigger shower, and a better feeling foyer. So to me, it's like a triple win and makes total sense to do. The other thing you could do is if you were imagining this extra bedroom to be an office or truly a guest bedroom where people aren't going to stay more than a few days, you could easily take back some of that closet space to create a coat closet in the hallway, which I think is a really elegant solution too. As I continue walking through, I feel like the dining room, pantry, butler's pantry kind of area all works really great flowing into the kitchen. I love that connection of the kitchen to the dining room through the butler's pantry. I think that could be a really beautiful space where you kind of build out a bar and make it feel a little bit different and also inviting at the same degree, because you still have that like throw pantry, which I think is equally as important. So all of those spaces I think work out well. But one thing I do notice is the fact that we don't have a really good connection to the garage. The garage is detached, but I still think we need some type of drop zone or some type of area when you're coming in the back to leave all the things. Because realistically, if you live here and you're parking in the garage and coming into the house, you're going to have things that you want to drop. And I personally don't want to see those piled up in the kitchen. So what I would do is move down the breakfast area just a little bit, make it a banquette, make it super cozy. You have a huge dining room. I think that it's totally fine to make it, 4-5 person cedar breakfast area, especially because there's an island as well. And then we'll create a very small mudroom in the back that's perfect because you can do a built-in on that back wall and have a drop zone for backpacks, for gear, for all of that good stuff, and a connection directly into the kitchen versus cluttering that back porch and making that the true entry zone. Another great thing you could do is covering the walkway from the main house to the garage. So technically attaching the garage, but it would still be exterior, just covered. That way, if you're having a crazy rainstorm and you have a bunch of groceries or small kids or a baby and a carrier, you can get from the garage into the house and stay dry. I think that whatever cost that might be, it is totally worth it to be able to get from the garage to the house and stay dry. I do want to take one more look at the kitchen just to see if we can optimize it in a way. And as soon as I look at this, I notice that we have quite a bit of pantry space, which is fantastic. But what I would love so much more is removing the refrigerator off the back wall and recessing it into that pantry wall, because we're still keeping a good amount of pantry space, but we're cleaning up the back wall of the kitchen and creating a much more elegant design that could be flanked with full height cabinets. You could add more windows, just a lot more could go on that back wall if we get the refrigerator off of it. The other argument for getting the refrigerator off that back wall is actually one that one of my one-on-ones mentioned. They hated the fact that their refrigerator door would open up into the walkway into the pantry. And if the refrigerator stays where it is currently, that's going to be an issue. But if you move it to the side and recess it into the pantry, it will be much less of an issue. And also, kids or spouse or whoever is getting into the refrigerator will not be interrupting the person cooking and in that more work zone area. On the living room side, I would center up these windows in the space on either side of the fireplace, because right now, if I was sitting in the space, and this is part of my walkthrough test, sitting in the space looking at this wall, these windows will feel like they are crowding the fireplace way too much. We want to center them up to leave space for curtains to go on either side of the windows and feel like they were intentionally placed there versus feeling like they're squishing the fireplace. It's time to go up the stairs and head to the second floor. But since we made all of those elevation changes, which I mentioned, I always like to work on that elevation first to see how it's going to affect the floor plan. To get rid of the awkward bump out on the front elevation, we have to bump this area out and then do a little reworking to the space. Since I wanted to center 3 windows above the porch, these will slide down and I'll create a little study nook. I think adding something like this to bedrooms makes such a difference on how someone's able to use the space. I'm relocating the linen closet to this space, 1, because it will double in size, and 2, because we need an air handler closet on this floor, which will go where the current linen closet is and take up the awkward unused space behind it. All of the bathrooms I'm flipping off the exterior wall so we can add windows to them. Next, I want to break up this hallway into some cased openings so that it doesn't feel like this long lifeless space. What I want to do is create a proper landing area where a nice piece of furniture could go, and then case openings, and then you'll enter the hallways for the actual bedrooms themselves. Right now, the laundry just has cabinets along the side, which I see as a huge mistake. And just by simply moving the washer and dryer down just a little bit, taking that sink and sticking it on the exterior wall with a window above, we're creating a laundry room that looks like it's out of a magazine, which I think is a huge win for the developer. Now for the primary, we are taking the bed off this back wall because we now have 3 windows that are centered up in that gable, which we did in the front elevation. Since the bed is moving to the other wall, we need to rework the rest of the spaces. And we also need to bump in this wall just a little bit because we made the change on the ground floor with the porch and breakfast nook area. Now that I'm thinking about it, I actually want to move the hallway wall in as well because I feel like our main landing area when you get to the top of the stair should definitely remain pretty deep. That way you have space for a piece of furniture at the top of the stair. But once you actually get into the hallways, I don't think they need to be as wide as they currently are. So we're going to move that down and give more space to all the rooms. And if you didn't notice, that is another way that we're working hierarchy into this design, both in elevation, but also in the floor plan, how the spaces feel. We have a large space at the top of the stair, and then we go into smaller, more private spaces to either side. I'm closing up the entry directly across from the bed to the bathroom because I always like to make sure, although I'm not a big TV watcher in the bedroom type of person, I always like to make sure that it's available for someone if they want it. So I like to provide a wall directly across from the bed. And in this case, we can only do that if we move the door, which I actually prefer to do too, because if we move it to the hallway space, then we can create a better layout for the bathroom. What I'm envisioning is a long vanity along this wall. We'll have a tub on the back wall, then a water closet, and a huge shower. Like, this bathroom is going to feel so good, and it's going to feel separate from the bedroom and also from the closet, creating an all-around more luxurious experience for the primary. Let me know your thoughts on all of my commentary, but also if you've ever encountered any of these design things and noticed how awkward they felt and noticed how maybe you would do it different, or even particular changes that you would have made to make this plan more fitting for your lifestyle. If you're interested in learning more about home design, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I will be sharing honestly, a lot of reviews, a lot of advice, a lot of my knowledge that I've learned over the years reviewing hundreds of homes and also designing lots and lots myself.